In countless instances we find it most satisfactory to believe that, though we were always ignorant of the fact, it always was a fact that S was SP. But humanism separates this class of cases from those in which it is more satisfactory to believe the opposite, e.g. that S is ephemeral, or P a passing event, or SP created by the perceiving act. Our critics seem, on the other hand, to wish to universalise the retrospective type of instance. Reality must pre-exist to every assertion for which truth is claimed, and, not content with this overuse of one particular type of judgment, our critics claim its monopoly. They appear to wish to cut off humanism from its rights to any retrospection at all. Humanism says that satisfactoriness is what distinguishes the true from the false. But satisfactoriness is both a subjective quality and a present one. Ergo, the critics appear to reason, an object, qua true, must always for humanism be both present and subjective, and a humanist's belief can never be in anything that lives outside the belief itself or antedates it. Why so preposterous a charge should be so current, I find it hard to say. Nothing is more obvious than the fact that both the objective and the past existence of the object may be the very things about it that most seem satisfactory, and that most invite us to believe them. The past tense can figure in the humanist's world, as well of belief as of representation, quite as harmoniously as in the world of anyone else. Mr. Joseph gives a special turn on this accusation. He charges me with being self-contradictory when I say that the main categories of thought were evolved in the course of experience itself, for I use these very categories to define the course of experiences by. Experience, as I talk about it, is a product of their use, and yet I take it as true anteriorly to them. This seems to Mr. Joseph to be an absurdity. I hope it does not seem such to his readers, for if experiences can suggest hypotheses at all, and they notoriously do so, I can see no absurdity whatever in the notion of a retrospective hypothesis having for its object the very train of experiences by which its own being, along with that of other things, has been brought about. If the hypothesis is satisfactory, we must of course believe it to have been true anteriorly of its formulation by ourselves. Every explanation of a present by a past seems to involve this kind of circle, which is not a vicious circle. The past is causa existendi of the present, which in turn is causa cognoscendi of the past. If the present were treated as causa existendi of the past, the circle might indeed be vicious. Closely connected with this pseudo-difficulty is another one of wider scope and greater complication, more excusable therefore. Footnote. This Mr. Joseph deals with, though in much too pettifogging and logic-chopping a way, on page 33 to 34 of his article. End footnote. Humanism, namely, asking how truth in point of fact is reached, and seeing that it is by ever substituting more satisfactory for less satisfactory opinions, is thereby led into a vague historic sketch of truth's development. The earliest opinions, it thinks, must have been dim, unconnected feelings, and only little by little did more and more orderly views of things replace them. Our own retrospective view of this whole evolution is now, let us say, the latest candidate for truth as yet reached in the process. To be a satisfactory candidate, it must give some definite sort of a picture of what forces keep the process going. On the subjective side, we have a fairly definite picture: sensation, association, interest, hypothesis. These account in a general way for the growth into a cosmos of the relative chaos with which the mind began. But on the side of the object, so to call it roughly, our view is much less satisfactory. Of which of our many objects are we to believe that it truly was there and at work before the human mind began? Time, space, kind, number, serial order, cause, consciousness are hard things not to objectify. Even transcendental idealism gives them standing as empirically real. Substance, matter, force fall down more easily before the criticism, and secondary qualities make almost no resistance at all. Nevertheless, When we survey the field of speculation, from scholasticism through Kantism to Spencerism, we find an ever-recurring tendency to convert the pre-human into a merely logical object, an unknowable ding and sick that but starts the process, or a vague materia prima that but receives our forms. The reasons for this are not so much logical as they are material. We can postulate an extra-mental that freely enough, though some idealists have denied us the privilege. But when we have done so, the what of it is hard to determine satisfactorily, because of the oppositions and entanglements of the variously proposed whats with one another and with the history of the human mind. The literature of speculative cosmology bears witness to this difficulty. Humanism suffers from it no more than any other philosophy suffers, but it makes all our cosmogonic theories so unsatisfactory that some thinkers seek relief in the denial of any primal dualism. Absolute thought, or pure experience, is postulated, and endowed with attributes calculated to justify the belief that it may run itself. Both these truth-claiming hypotheses are non-dualistic in the old mind and matter sense, but the one is monistic and the other pluralistic as to the world process itself. Some humanists are non-dualists of this sort. I myself am one unsvar of the pluralistic brand. But doubtless dualistic humanists also exist, as well as non-dualistic ones of the monistic wing. Mr. Joseph pins these general philosophic difficulties on humanism alone, or possibly on me alone. My article spoke vaguely of a most chaotic pure experience coming first, and building up the mind. But how can two structureless things interact so as to produce a structure? My critic triumphantly asks. Of course they can't, as purely so named entities. We must make additional hypotheses. We must beg a minimum of structure for them. The kind of minimum that might have tended to increase towards what we now find actually developed is the philosophical desideratum here. The question is that of the most materially satisfactory hypothesis. Mr. Joseph handles it by formal logic purely, as if he had no acquaintance with the logic of hypothesis at all. Mr. Joseph again is much bewildered as to what a humanist can mean when he uses the word knowledge. He tries to convict me of vaguely identifying it with any kind of good. Knowledge is a difficult thing to define briefly, and Mr. Joseph shows his own constructive hand here even less than in the rest of his article. I have myself put forth on several occasions a radically pragmatist account of knowledge, the existence of which account my critic probably does not know of, so perhaps I had better not say anything about knowledge until he reads it and attacks that. I will say, however, that whatever the relation called knowing may itself prove to consist in, I can think of no conceivable kind of object which may not become an object of knowledge on humanistic principles as well as on the principles of any other philosophy. Footnote. For a recent attempt, effective on the whole, at squaring humanism with knowing, I may refer to Professor Woodbridge's very able address at the St. Louis Congress, The Field of Logic, printed in Science, New York, November 1904. End footnote. I confess that I am pretty steadily hampered by the habit, on the part of humanism's critics, of assuming that they have truer ideas than mine of truth and knowledge, the nature of which I must know of and cannot need to have redefined. I have consequently to reconstruct these ideas in order to carry on the discussion. I have, for example, had to do so in some parts of this article, and I thereby expose myself to charges of caricature. In one part of Mr. Joseph's attack, however, I rejoice that we are free from this embarrassment. It is an important point and covers probably a genuine difficulty, so I take it up last. When, following Schiller and Dewey, I define the true as that which gives the maximal combination of satisfactions, and say that satisfaction is a many-dimensional term that can be realised in various ways, Mr. Joseph replies, rightly enough, that the chief satisfaction of a rational creature must always be his thought that what he believes is true, whether the truth brings him the satisfaction of collateral profits or not. This would seem, however, to make of truth the prior concept, and to relegate satisfaction to a second